Rain battered the tin roof like 1,000 drumming hooves, the wind howling through cracks in the wood as if the whole prairie were crying out. The roadhouse stood alone on the edge of the dirt road, its light flickering against the darkness of the storm. Inside, the smell of beef stew simmering over the stove mingled with damp leather and wood smoke. Clara Monroe moved quietly behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her dark hair pinned loosely beneath a worn kerchief. She'd been running the place alone since her husband died 2 winters back, keeping the doors open for travelers, ranch hands, and drifters too tired or too lonely to ride any farther. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the only piece of life she still held together after grief had done its work. The door burst open with a crash, slamming against the wall. A gust of rain followed, scattering dust and straw across the floor. Standing there was Eli Walker, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat dripping and boots caked in mud. His face was lined and hard, the kind that carried more storms than years, a faded scar traced from his cheekbone down to his jaw, the mark of some long-ago fight that hadn't gone in his favor. Clara looked up, startled but steady. "Evening, mister," she said, her voice calm. "You'll want to shake that rain off before it freezes to you." Eli grunted, stomped his boots, and hung his hat on a nail. He didn't bother wiping his boots on the rug, left a trail of wet footprints right up to the counter. When he spoke, his voice was rough and low, a growl that seemed half born of whiskey and half of bitterness. "Coffee, black, and quick about it." She nodded, wordless, and poured from the pot warming on the stove. The tin mug rattled slightly when she set it in front of him. He wrapped his big hands around it as though trying to steal its warmth. For a moment, the only sound was the fire popping and the rain easing against the windows. Clara went back to stirring her stew, pretending not to notice the man's glare burning into her back. She'd seen men like him before. Men who carried anger the way others carried saddlebags. Heavy, always ready to drop it on someone else's shoulders. He took a long drink, then slammed the cup down so hard a bit of coffee splashed over the edge. "You run this place all on your own?" "Yes, sir." His eyes flicked over the empty tables, the patchwork curtains, the faded photograph of a smiling man that sat on the mantel above the hearth. "Ain't right," he muttered. "No husband, no help?" "No husband," she said simply, not looking up. He snorted, shaking his head. "Well, that explains it. World's gone soft. Women ought to stick to what they're made for." He leaned back, the chair creaking under him, voice rising with his irritation. "Lady, just stay in the kitchen where you belong, you hear? World's no place for a woman trying to play barkeep." The words landed sharp as a slap, cutting through the quiet. The 2 ranch hands in the corner looked up from their cards, eyes darting between the man and the widow. The fire hissed softly. Clara's hands stilled. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she lifted the ladle again, slow and deliberate, and filled a bowl from the pot. The smell of rich stew spread through the air, beef, carrots, onion, thyme. She carried it over to him, setting it down with quiet grace. "I'll stay in the kitchen then," she said, her voice even and kind. "But you'll still get your supper. No man ought to ride through a storm hungry no matter how much thunder he brings with him." Eli's jaw tightened. He looked at her, expecting defiance or fear, but found neither. There was no tremor in her voice, no bitterness in her eyes. Only a kind of steady light, calm as a sunrise after rain. He stared down at the stew. Steam rose from the bowl, carrying warmth into the chill that clung to his bones. Slowly, he picked up the spoon, muttering something under his breath that might have been thanks or might have been shame. The room stayed quiet as he ate. The ranch hands went back to their cards, the fire settled into a gentle crackle, and Clara returned to her work. Outside, the wind began to soften, trading its fury for a slow, steady rain. When Eli finally looked up again, Clara was wiping the counter clean, humming a tune that sounded older than the hills. Her sleeves were smudged with flour, her face lit by the soft glow of the lantern. Something in him, something that had been clenched tight for years, loosened just a little. He didn't say sorry. Men like Eli didn't know how. But when she passed by, refilling his cup without a word, he didn't look away this time. He just nodded, once, and she nodded back. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the angry cowboy felt something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a star. Morning came slow and gentle across the plains, the kind of dawn that painted everything in gold and rose. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving behind a smell of wet earth and sage. The roadhouse looked softer in that light, less lonely somehow. Smoke drifted from the chimney, curling toward the pale sky. Inside, Clara moved quietly through the dining room, setting out fresh plates and wiping down the counter. She had slept little, though the night had been calm after the storm. There was something about the stranger, that hard-eyed cowboy with the scar and the silence, that lingered in her mind. He hadn't spoken much after his outburst, but he'd eaten every bite of stew and even helped himself to another biscuit before turning in by the fire. Now, as the first light spilled across the floorboards, she found him still there, sitting by the window. Eli Walker looked different in the daylight. The harsh lines of his face had softened, and his eyes, no longer shadowed by the brim of his hat, held a quiet weariness. His hat rested on the table, and a plate of half-eaten eggs and biscuits sat before him. He had the look of a man who didn't know where he was going next, or maybe didn't care. "Coffee's hot," Clara said gently, approaching with the pot. He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Appreciate it." She poured the dark liquid steaming between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the fire popping and a bird calling from somewhere outside. Eli took a sip, then leaned back with a slow exhale. "Didn't sleep much." "Most folks don't their first night through a bad storm," Clara said. He gave a low grunt of agreement, then set his cup down. "You run this place all by yourself? Ain't got no one to help?" She smiled faintly. "Had someone once. My husband built this roadhouse. When he passed, I figured I'd keep it going. Can't say I do it well, but I do it honest." Eli's gaze drifted to the picture above the mantel, a young man with a strong jaw and kind eyes, arm around Clara's shoulders. He cleared his throat. "He looks like a good man." "He was," she said softly. "Still is in my heart." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, but it was deep. Eli's hands fidgeted around the mug. "I lost mine too," he said after a while, his voice rougher now, as though the words scraped on their way out. "Not to death, to me. To who I became after the war. Couldn't let go of the anger. Took it out on everyone." She packed up one morning and rode east. Took our boy with her. Clara looked at him, really looked. The bitterness he carried wasn't just anger. It was grief that had nowhere to go. She set down the coffee pot, her eyes warm and steady. Sometimes anger's just pain that forgot where it came from. Eli swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "Ain't no one ever said that to me before." She gave a small smile. Then maybe no one's listened long enough. He stared at her a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe her. Then he pushed his plate away and reached into his coat, pulling out a few crumpled bills. He laid them on the counter. "For the meal. And for last night." She looked at the money but didn't touch it. "You don't owe me anything." "Sure I do," he said. "Said things I shouldn't have." His jaw flexed. "Wasn't right." Clara shook her head gently. "You were tired, cold, and hurt. I've heard worse. Sometimes people need to break before they can start fixing." He blinked at her as though the words struck something deep he'd forgotten was there. Slowly he stood and reached for his hat. "You're a strange woman, Miss Monroe." "Maybe," she said, her smile soft. "But strange can be good company." He hesitated near the door, glancing back at her. The morning light framed her in gold, apron dusted with flour, eyes kind and steady. He tipped his hat low, not in mockery this time, but in respect. "Thank you. For the stew." "And the rest," she nodded. "Ride safe, Mr. Walker. The road's kinder after the rain." He stepped outside, boots crunching on the wet gravel. The air was cool, the horizon stretching wide and endless before him. For a long moment he stood there, watching the light spill over the hills. Something in his chest ached. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the slow, tender kind that comes when hope stirs for the first time in years. Weeks later, travelers passing through would tell of Eli Walker, the cowboy who once snarled at every soul, but now fixed fences for neighbors and left fresh bread on Clara Monroe's porch every Friday morning. They'd say he was different now, quieter but softer somehow, like a man who'd been forgiven for something he couldn't name. And on some evenings, as the sun melted into the plains, you could see two figures sitting on the porch of the roadhouse, the widow and the cowboy, sharing a pot of coffee, watching the light fade, saying nothing at all, because some things once broken don't need words to be mended.